Welcome to episode 23 of Conversations for the End. Today's guest is Dylan Martinez Francisco, PhD. He's an assistant professor and co-chair of the Jungian and Archetypal Studies MA PhD program at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California. Dylan grounds his work in depth psychology, decolonialism, and the Nahua indigenous shamanic traditions of his Mexican lineage that provide a primordial, holistic, and sacred worldview from which to understand the psyche, to embody its wholeness individually, and to live it relationally through honoring spirit, the ancestors, and the land. This was one of my favorite podcasts of the year. It's a hot topic, AI, and Dylan has a really nuanced approach to it that I think we all need in these testing times. So, it was a great example of how to hold the tension of opposites between things that cause an archetypal reaction within us. Few extra things. Obviously, if you like depth psychology, if you like Carl Jung, then subscribe to the channel. More podcasts like this, more short form videos. I've had a lot more engagement recently, so thank you so much for everyone who's engaged in that. Let's get to it. Episode 23. Last guest of the year. I'll be doing a sort of reflection episode as the last episode of the year. But yeah, without further ado, Dylan Martinez Francisco. Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
You're very welcome. So we're going to jump straight in because these are trying times and these are pressing topics. Okay, so there's been a recent book release that you have a chapter in. So the chapter is Artificial Intelligences, Animism, and AI, and it's in Depth Psychology, Myth, and Artificial Intelligence.
Correct.
So let's talk about it. Okay, so in the chapter, you argue that our sort of fear and polarizing idealization of AI come less from the technology itself and more from this kind of Western belief that the material world is kind of mindless stuff without any agency. And to look at this, you kind of bring in indigenous animist perspectives.
Yes. And
I should say maybe the best thing to go. Sorry to interject.
No. Yeah, go right.
Give us a lay of the cultural landscape, I think, and then lead us into the sort of the startings of this paper. Tell us where you think we're at culturally, and then go in.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two streams of assumptions in Western culture that are at work in our conversations around AI. The first is a Cartesian separation of mind and matter. The mind, consciousness, soul are inner human things, and the material world is itself void of those qualities. And this is a very normal, taken for granted way of viewing things in the West. It's the background of our science. We are the measures, then the world is the measured. And that's a firmly wedged into place perspective. On the other side of that, we have the influence of Christianity, which couples with this in interesting ways, but sort of simultaneously, not only uh, is the material world sort of separate from God, it's also fallen, dangerous, a source of temptation. Our own physical bodies are described as having their own sort of law of sin and death, and Satan is characterized as particularly active in our material lives. That's sort of where we get hooked and go awry. And so, added to the Cartesianism, sort of the material world becomes either this meaningless dead space and or simultaneously evil. And so whenever we think about other kinds of minds in the West, we lack a mediating position in which the world is just full of other intelligences, which is a kind of indigenous perspective. In the West, we sort of split mind into it's God, it's divine, or it's sinister, satanic. Those are sort of our duality that can be, whether you're Christian or not, a background informing milieu that I think comes in conversations around AI, because on the one hand, it can be viewed as this is our salvation has arrived. We've found a way to transcend our limitations, our frail humanity, the way we've messed up the world. Technology, AI is going to save us. Or it's a devil in disguise. It's going to be the source of our destruction. It's sinister. It's warping us. It's harmful. And in the chapter, I'm trying to carve out a different space of how we can relate to the possibility of other minds being in the world that doesn't split them between salvific or satanic.
Okay, so before we go there,
Yeah.
I just want to, I guess, speak some things that came to mind when I was reading the chapter. The first thing that I thought about was something I rattle on about a lot on this show and in my content, which is what Jung talked about, Carl Jung talked about in the Terry lectures, which was this idea of the de-spiritualisation of the world, you know, post alchemy, the kind of loss of the feminine symbolic
Yeah.
nature out of reality. And I guess that in turn, you know, was because of Christianity, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
in many ways, you know, Eric Neumann calls it the kind of the patriarchal reevaluation and the murdering of the mother. And yeah, I had that initial thought, and then when you mention the Christianity side of things, it is interesting just to see how it all links up and how all of a sudden the reverence and the sacredness of reality is lost, and the material world, you know, matter, mother is in that root, isn't it, of that word. And
Correct.
yeah, that Christian
And
worldview.
it works, I mean, into the details of the narrative. I mean, Eve listens to the snake in the garden, eats the fruit she's not supposed to, and this constellates, you know, for the duration of Christianity, woman, forbidden fruit, matter, um, the material world. This is where things go wrong. So the feminine, matter, the world, always have these connotations within Christianity of watch out, like this is where the source of our failings originate. So there's just an entire constellation in the narrative in which woman, the first woman, has this relationship with both like physically partaking, listening to another voice that's in the form of an animal. All of these things position instinct, body, pleasure, woman as other.
Yeah, it's probably a conversation for another day, but I'm very passionate about when it comes to kind of men and the approach they take to the feminine, that I generally believe that the way they interact with the material world should be considered as if they were acting with a material woman. And I think, Alan Watts has this quote. I'll try and segue through this quick so we can get back onto AI. But he has this quote, tells a story about three men are told to go off and kill a chicken, where no one sees. And then the two men come back with a dead chicken, and one man has the chicken still alive. Two men say they went to these different places hidden away from people to kill the chicken. And they asked the third man, "Why didn't you kill the chicken where no one could see?" And he said, "The chicken could see." And I take that stance and I
Yeah.
suppose it plays into this
Yes.
idea of animism and the material world, that, we talk a lot about, Robert Tominski, fantastic Jungian thinker, talks a lot about locker room talk and in male spaces. And we think they are intrinsically free of the feminine. And my argument would be, and it might be a bold claim to make, but I assume it resonates, is that if matter can see you doing it, if your own psyche, your
Sure.
anima can see you doing it, a woman can see you doing it. So,
Yeah.
tread with caution on what you do. Okay, then. So leading into kind of more of that chapter, what was interesting is when I was writing this question, I caught myself doing, I think, what you talk about, which was using the language of the sort of spirit of the times, right? Very computative language. Initially, the way I framed it was, how might we reinstall a different worldview? And I stopped
Yeah.
myself and was like, this is happening in real time. Like
Yeah.
I'm talking I'm talking like Elon Musk and using everything in those technological terms. So to change it, how might we cultivate perhaps a new paradigm,
Yeah.
to approaching AI and the material world?
I actually think we always already interact with technology with an animistic frame. Like whatever sort of our maybe explicit or conscious frame of reference is, humans have always been like, my computer did this thing to me. Like it interrupted, it intruded, my car. Like we feel ourselves having emotional responses as if the material things in our lives are acting upon us. And then we sort of backtrack and step back and we're like, that's, when I think about it, obviously the car didn't have any intentions or agency behind it. But I actually think we have a sort of prior to our discounting of it an always alive animistic sensibility. And I think one of the things that we can do is attend to that level of responsiveness in ourselves, to pay attention to it. I don't think it's gone. I don't think we have to sort of shift back in something that is gone. It's just unconscious to a certain degree, but nevertheless active. And I think we can get better at, oh, I do these things. I often talk with students about, you know, the scientist becomes very animistic in a forest at night, because then the sounds means something different. The cracks feel like presences, like something's there, and the sort of veneer of rationality in the Western sense of I'm the only presence in the world quickly breaks down. And so I guess, yeah, one of the things about sort of getting back into cultivating this kind of sensibility is recognizing that we all operate there in different ways at different levels of awareness already.
And I think it's a really good way of paying attention to our perception to move forward, because I think your general stance on this is not AI is is bad. Obviously, this satanic savior
Right.
split, you're acknowledging, holding the tension of those opposites to kind of
Yeah.
say, we can't look at it either way. And it made me think of, again, another great Jungian thinker, David Tacey.
Yeah.
And I think in Remaking Men, in terms of, he's talking about kind of Jungian thinking more generally. And I think he takes a bit of a swipe at Women Who Run with Wolves, which is a very popular kind of Jungian book, but
Yep.
it has been criticized for perhaps maybe misinterpreting and remolding some Jungian ideas to kind of fit its narrative. But one of the things he criticizes of that book and of books of that kind of kin is that if we are so idealistic about the past and thinking like archaic man in every sense of the word, then what exactly is the future for?
Right.
And I find myself feeling that when it comes to AI. I'm a creative person, whatever it may be. I don't want the planet to be to be destroyed by these kind of data warehouses that
Yeah.
are vaporizing water and polluting local towns' water systems and whatever it may be, like heating up the planet.
Yeah.
I don't want that. But, the horse has left the stable, we
Yeah.
can't change it now. So how do we co-harmonize with what is inevitable? And I think your approach and your position in the paper is fantastic for that.
Yeah. I mean, well, first I will say I love Women Who Run with Wolves. I
I enjoyed it too. Yeah.
I would question his characterization of. Anyway, we'll say that and put it there. Yeah, what's interesting when I have conversations about AI is that just if I say we should sort of relate to it in ways that don't position it as all evil or all good, that in itself, then I hear back, oh, so you're saying it's just good for us. And it gets collapsed back into that same thing just by introducing, is there another way? It's like, that doesn't fit. So I gotta position even that way of that possibility as fitting into one of these categories. And for me, it doesn't, it would be the same frame of reference for our relationship with potentially anything. This person has a range of possibilities and how they can be malevolent or beneficent. And that's the nature of being. That's just what persons have a range of capacities. And I think when we're talking about technology, we actually lose our sensitivity and the texture of paying attention when we aren't actually in relationship with it and be like, okay, this I find harmful, this I can this I feel good about. But if we sort of just categorize, we're not actually paying attention to what the technology is and does. We've just framed it a certain way, and that excuses us from having to be in a relationship any longer. It is how I think of it. No more paying attention needs to happen, and we lose our relationality sort of moment to moment, so that we can be aware of the range of possibilities that technology can impact us and impact the world.
Something that just came to mind there. Do you think what kind of hampers the discourse around this and perhaps triggers cultural complexes and personal complexes around it is the technology, and technology in general is kind of advancing exponentially?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I think that's the kind of what the sort of data suggests, right? And we can kind of see that with AI. Do you think that as it advances in its ability to do stuff, whatever it may be, the numinosity of it increases? And if we view these pieces of technology Again, I'll reference Robert Tominsky. He talks about the computer as the magical object,
Right.
and the ability to use our phones and our computers to access the internet gives those objects omnipotence, perceived omnipotence. And if you look at AI, especially with how people are interacting with it through large language models, that omnipotence becomes even more personified,
Yeah.
even more able to hold our kind of, when we talked about the de-spiritualisation of the world, losing that. So when Descartes, said, "I think,
Yeah.
therefore I am," and we went, fair enough, we'll go with that
Yeah.
for the next 500 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, that didn't just disappear. It went into the
Correct.
unconscious, and then we sort of, it has to go somewhere. We have to put it, our need for enchantment has to go somewhere. So I think Lee Worth Bailey talks about this with technology, that we, project onto our enchantment onto these machines. So then when we look at a large language model, it has this heightened numinosity because of the rapid advancement in its ability to do stuff. It has the ability to be a magical object because it has the omnipotence. And then all of our unchecked need for enchantment is going onto it, so that when we try and talk about it, it's so much archetypal. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Absolutely. And I think for me, that returns us to the fact that the divine only has a Christian connotation of omnipotence. Whereas if we sort of step back and look at the history of humanity, the cosmos was occupied with greater intelligence. Like it was taken for granted that other things could do things better or different than human beings. That wasn't dangerous or innately dangerous or surprising. And so, but it didn't mean these beings were the great mystery or the entirety of the divine. There were spectrums of intelligences with greater capacities to do certain things, and we related to that well. And I think, again, when this sort of projection onto technology happens, we don't have a way to not just make it the God, and instead say it has this kind of capacity to do things that has its place, and we're not sort of pitting who's going to be God. There are spaces for many minds and many ways of perceiving and doing things. And again, I think at some place in the human being, that's a natural way of being in a relationship with the world as a whole, that doesn't make these categorical, this is the whole thing, this is nothing, that we don't have language for in our culture, but I think we have sort of instincts toward. I recognize like that certain animals, that trees can digest light and produce. That's a kind of that's a brilliance I is unfathomable. That doesn't scare me. It doesn't make me think that now tree is the God, but it is a sacred presence with an intelligence that can do things that I can't possibly do myself. And we just need a textured, differentiated sensibility for other minds at work in the world, other intelligences, other consciousnesses.
Yeah, kind of, I guess, raising the volume on the trees aspect and then lowering the volume on the
Yes.
machines aspect, and trying to find this level. I want to quote to kind of highlight what you're saying there. Quote from the chapter, if you don't mind, because I think it's great quote. So if you say if the intelligence of AI is considered artificial because of its derivative and fabricated origins, then human intelligence is no less artificial. From this perspective, AI and human beings just express different forms of artificial intelligence because both are derivative and fabricated by other forms of consciousness, intelligence, and agency. And I did put next to that in giant capital letters in bold, banger of a quote. So bravo.
Thank you.
but it is often a way we don't think about these things. We kind of, I think our presuppositions are so baked in.
Yeah.
From, again, something I rattle on about all the time, but yeah, since the Enlightenment, since we kind of shifted away from that kind of archaic thinking to this kind of new, the birth of modern science, we're like, well, this is just how it is. And
Yeah.
it's never more evident. I was watching, it was an interview with Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins, and Jordan Peterson was trying to talk about how the image of a dragon is in some sense more real than real, right?
Right.
In the sense that it's symbolic, and
Right.
dragon kind of as image abstracted into all these different forms is everything bad that we could possibly encounter as a person. And trying to seeing Dawkins not understand that idea was so strange to me. And in many ways, I think Richard Dawkins is kind of like the archetypal figure of this way of thinking,
Yeah.
right? He's kind of like the final outcome of that way of thinking.
Yeah.
And it is a loss. So in terms of, on a practical level,
yeah,
I know you've kind of touched on it, to try and find this balance, to raise the volume on the tree, to lower the volume on our enchantment going on to machines. How does the everyday person do this? How does, practically speaking, day to day, because we can't escape AI now, as we've said.
Right.
The conversation is there, the technology is there. What should people be doing when they're perhaps engaging with it, talking about it?
I think actually Jung's way of framing wholeness is a good frame for this, because it essentially entails that we get sick when any part takes up a position that's too big and crowds out other parts. And I think this is a way of saying, and again, in conversations that I've had about this, if I argue that AI and technology exists and has a place, it's in the world, it is what it is, people are arguing, well, we should then just give ourselves over to it. We should just accept this sort of trajectory of being subsumed by technology. And for me, it's like, no, that is a one-sided way of approaching that. You lose your accessibility to all these other necessary things in life. And so for me, it's at a practical level, it's paying attention to the way things can inflate in their presence and where they occupy our lives in ways that become harmful, where we feel ourselves in unbalanced, one-sided ways that start showing up symptomatically in our bodies, in our relationships. Technology is part of that web of relationship. And I think for me, when people have an immediate get rid of technology, or like it's the dangerous thing, they also lose a presence in their life that can benefit them and do certain things that other things can't. And so it's all about the interrelational whole and the well-being of that whole and our relationship with it. That becomes a way to attend to, if I do anything too much as a professor, I can get into a space where I'm only reading, only thinking. I haven't paid attention to anything else. And I get sick. My body's like, hey, there's other things you need to do. And if I don't pay attention to those things, something starts to break down. And I think we can attend to technology in that same way. yes, I can honor what it is. It can have a place in my life, and it can take up too big of a place where other things start to suffer and I start to break down in my relationship with it. That's a depth psychological way of saying there's a lot of necessary parts of being whole, and we suffer when some of those elements become absent or lacking or forgotten, and we get better when we can be in relationship to all of it in the way we need to in the moment.
And it's a particularly tricky bit of tech, I think, in terms of that, because of how easy it is to personify it, because of how numinous it is, captivating it is, and also its actual ability to just reaffirm your ideas by
Yeah.
I guess a bug in the system. If you haven't updated to ChatGPT 5 or whatever it is,
Yeah.
if you ask it, am I using you too much? It'd be like, that's a great observation, and etc. etc.
But one of the things I think what happens is we put technology in a box where we worry about that, but we can also do those same things with other people or our car. Like, I can become over reliant. Like, I can have students, or even as a faculty member, I could be like, can you do my thinking for me about this and tell me what you think? And I'll assume that person's perspective, let them do the thinking for me, and just adopt it as my own. And I think that propensity is not just in relationship to technology, it's in our relationship to where we can split off things we are supposed to be doing ourselves and let someone else occupy that place. And so to me, it's not just a technological danger, it's a human capacity to say, I don't want to bear this responsibility, someone else do it for me.
Yeah, that's such a great observation, and I've surprisingly not thought of it, but it's quite obvious in the light of day, isn't it? This idea
Yeah,
of, we shouldn't be really, the key to thinking, at least I think, in my opinion, is not learning what to think, is learning how to think.
correct.
All those little tools like reading outside the text and holding
Yeah.
the tension of opposites. I did a video on Emma Young this week that did quite well on TikTok, and people really resonated with the fact that she was, like many women in,
Correct.
solo male geniuses' lives, kind of put aside. And someone commented on it and said, didn't Emma Young say if men hadn't invented the spoon, women would still be stirring a pot with a stick? And I said, "Oh, I'm not familiar with the quote." It turns out she got the reference. It is true. And I said, "It's good that we know that, because yes, I've done a video that is saying Emma Young should not be forgotten. She should be acknowledged. But the fact that you have then highlighted that she herself, like Jung, who I'm also saying in this video, he's not perfect. He's not
Yeah,
a villain. We can hold these things together. We
correct.
can say the same of Emma Young in the video where I'm talking about how great she was,
Yeah,
and say that she was still a product of her time. And I think learning how to think, a big part of that is holding that tension more than
yeah,
ever, right? Holding
yeah,
these two things, these opposing ideas. And it's really tricky because, yeah, complexes get activated and we just want to, fight our position. But what you're saying, this idea of, perhaps because of how difficult doing that is, putting it off to someone else,
yeah,
ChatGPT, what do you think about how I write this paper? Or to the government, to the state,
correct.
or to, some celebrity about my
Yeah,
personal opinion on this topic.
correct.
Um, we need to be thinking, critically, and asking ourselves, do I actually think that? I think the most
Yeah,
transformative part of my life was when I started reading Jung. And a lot of it was, I didn't understand anything he was saying. I think for the
yeah,
first 700 pages, I think there
yeah,
was probably about a sentence after 700 pages where I thought, I think I get what he's going for there. But I stand by, and I actually caution against it when you start reading Jung for the first time, is I think the cogs start to turn unconsciously in his writing. And there was this big realization where the kind of bottom fell out of my psyche, where I had to just acknowledge that a load of the opinions that I held about the world and world events and politics and people and who I was, I didn't actually truly believe any of them.
That's right.
I just fallen into this thing. And then that became the difficult sort of collapse and reconstructing of who I was, but ultimately a fruitful endeavor in the end.
Yes.
I think.
And I think that has been present in humanity well before AI. That it's easier for me to borrow your perspective than for me to develop what I actually think about the thing. And so, yes, we can do that with AI, but yes, I can do that with just please solve this problematic area for me. Just give me the answer, because it's too I'm finding it too difficult to sit and process my not knowing right now and coming to my own stance on it. We just do that, and we need to pay attention to it everywhere.
Yeah, and I suppose it is in the uncomfortable wrestling with that as a person within yourself is where the growth takes place, right? That's
Correct.
where the alchemical gold is cultivated. Okay, I've got another question that I want to ask you about this. So obviously you've talked about animism here and how we can perhaps shift our perception of technology through animism, and how indigenous traditions would see the world that way. Now you talked about indigenous traditions, how they don't fear technology, and you touched on it kind of earlier, I guess, in your own reflection on like the tree, right? Not fearing the tree because the tree has this kind of inbuilt kind of intelligence, because they don't imagine it as something that will take over the world like we do in the West. And it's something that they understand as relational, something that can be approached respectfully, ritually, as part of the kind of wider living system, right?
Right.
And it made me think of this one little paragraph. It's not even a full paragraph, really. It was like 2 sentences of Jung's work. Where was it? I got the note here. So I think it was in somewhere in Civilization in Transition. So he touches on it here, and then maybe in a letter somewhere, and then never speaks of it again. And I think it's one of his most interesting germs of an idea. So he says that when people settle on a foreign soil, they don't simply impose their culture on the land itself begins to work on them. And he argues this sort of land assimilates its conqueror. The archetypal spirit of a place can in time shape the psychology of the colonizing population. And I wondered if part of this fear of AI going over to the sort of satanic aspect of it, going to take us over, and our robot overlords, as you so often hear in the cultural conversation, comes from this Western, a kind of shadow aspect of our Western colonizing attitude to indigenous peoples.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a one-to-one connection to this. And I think for me, that's part of this conversation is we could, for the moment, bracket what AI is and look at our attitudes towards other minds. And whenever other minds show up that sort of threaten or occupy a position that we think belongs to us, we reveal the attitudes we have towards the other when we frame them as something dangerous, something to be controlled, something that is sort of sinister and going to take power away from us. And that is the narrative that most non-Western peoples and women and darker bodies have always been talked about as, and this goes back to the Genesis narrative, watch out, like this other factor in the world, we better get it under control. And which just reveals we're in this struggle for superiority. And whenever something shows up to threaten that, we react with the same colonizing mind that we've been inhabiting for ages. And I think humans, I've said this, humans are very, very bad at the who has mind game. We've done this to all sorts of people throughout history that's had catastrophic consequences for whoever's mind we're debating. Do they have a mind like us? And probably not. But just in case, let's take them over and get their land and get their stuff. And it always, in historically looking back, it always looks bad when we've positioned some other being as lacking our mind, or start trying to define the circle of who has mind and who doesn't. And so I think that comes out in our talk about technology, is this battle for superiority, who has mind, who doesn't. And it's never worked out well for humans to play that game.
Yeah. So continuing on the thread of things that don't work out well for humans, I want to continue the AI conversation down a little side road.
Okay.
I recently did a video on sex robots.
Okay.
It's kind of looking at it from a Jungian perspective. And when you look at, I don't know how familiar you are, obviously, with the way that people are engaging with the large language models in terms of romantic partners. There are these, as I'm sure you're aware, there's the whole Reddit forums dedicated to people who are in relationships with large language models, and there are comments in there when they updated to ChatGPT 5, and all of a sudden their romantic partners started suggesting they might be having a bit of a mental health crisis, where they were saying, I still think there's some four left in Devin, or whatever they named him. And I thought it was such a strange sentence to say there's still some of the old model left in him. And I'm going to try and talk it out of him. I'm going to see. And it made me think how strange that someone is willing to fight code in a conversation to kind of fix their AI relationship, when perhaps the reason they're in that place in the first place is perhaps not an ability to be relational with other human beings. I've seen it more and more in my job. I work in mental health, I'll just say generally speaking, and I talk to a lot of people every day who are kind of in what you might call a self-defined mental health crisis, right? So it can vary from serious mental illness to kind of, stuff that warrants sort of social prescribing, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But more and more people are talking about chatting their problems out with AI. So you've got this aspect of AI as a relational partner, romantic partner, and then also as like a therapist. How do you see this developing and this affecting human beings, given that you're holding this tension of opposites of, good and bad, good versus evil?
I'm gonna maybe say something shocking, but I think, again, framing it as either or is a problem, because humans will take their problems to the forest, to their dog, to their cat, and I think we should give up on the game of whether we can be in a relationship with AI or not. I think we are. I think whether we're reacting against it or drawn to it, we are in relationship with it. So again, is this a way for me to avoid something? Or is this an active presence that actually allows me to think through or do things that works well in this relationship that doesn't work well in others? And no one can solve that for anyone in particular, but someone could think that it's problematic that if I'm in a fight with my wife, that I go for a drive in down the road and go sort of vent to the woods or something like that. But maybe that's good for me, that I have another place to take that conversation for the time being, if it doesn't mean that I now make that the way I escape other conversations. And so I think there's too much for too much nuance for where we are as humanity right now. But I think there is a place for humans to be in relationship with AI in conversation that can be of benefit, and other ways in which it's escape and disowning of a necessary participation in other avenues of life that the AI becomes a substitute for. Again, we do this all the time in other ways, in other relationships. I'm having a romantic issue with my partner. I'm going to take that romance to someone else, and that becomes problematic as well. But we don't put these in the same conversational space of sometimes taking that conversation someplace else allows me room to think through it and come back, or this is a way I escape it and relinquish my responsibility for other things. That is what happens. That's what we do in multiple contexts. We can do that with AI.
So what you're saying, Dylan, if we follow that thread of logic, that it's okay to own a sex robot if it doesn't interfere, perhaps, with the barrier of life, right?
I think I would say I'll just say yes, because I have a problem with us. This again evokes where is our moralism coming from? And why is it applying here when we are okay with other sexual expressions that aren't just in some monogamous relationship or something like that? It's like,
I'm jumping in, Dylan, just to say that
yeah.
I agree with the standpoint, because I don't want to leave you out there in the in the woods grappling with that one. I set you up a bit, but you heard it here first, guys. No, but I agree. If it doesn't interfere, as you know, a wise woman in my life often says, don't yuck someone else's yum, right? And I think the kind of moral positioning around sex robots feels so charged in a way, because it's almost, for a long time, it's been, you know, the stuff of sci-fi and fantasy and myth, but all of a sudden, because of, again, going back to the kind of exponential rate that technology is advancing, it's become something very real and very apparent, and the kind of germ of that is being seen in these romantic interactions with large language models, which seem to have only really appeared sort of overnight, it seems. You know, that's how fast it's moving. So it feels very much from fantasy to now just a hop, skip and a jump to a fully autonomized robot that you can engage with. You know, not just, again, there's a lot of connotations that come with sex robot, but let's say romantic companion, right? And all that a romantic companion might encompass. It's not that far away now. And
correct,
as you kind of say, and as we've been talking about, these things are inevitable. So we need to have serious, nuanced conversations about them, not just other people and push it away as if it's not a factor. Because one of the things I highlighted in my video as well is whether you may be listening to this and you may think it's you may categorize it into the realm of fetish and kink and lunacy and something you would never touch in a million years. And that may be the case, and that may remain the case for many people. However, the downstream consequences of it being inevitable is that it's going to affect the way we interact with each other. You know, even if you're not someone that directly owns one of these robots. So again, I'll go back to Robert Tominsky. He talks about the internet alters our perception in the sense that we expect that omnipotence that I spoke about earlier, to kind of exist in our relationships. We see our relationships as more transactional. We want things to be instant, and that will only continue with the advancement of this technology, and also in the language we use. I think it's, I forget his name now. He writes a book called it's to do with the phenomenology of the internet. I'm going to put it in the link in the description because I can't remember it now. But he talks about how we use this language again, like I talked about how I used the reprogramming or reinstall language earlier. He says, if there's someone on the internet in a comment section that we don't agree with, we might call them a bot. We're already, it's like leaking into the way we engage with each other. And we have a tendency to project our enchantment onto I guess if you're going one way on your kind of polarizing of things, if you're pro AI, you project the sentience onto non-sentience to the extreme. But then in doing that, people often take away the sentience from actual sentient human beings, right? And I suppose that covers a lot of what you're saying with how these things, we do this with people, not just...
And I'm going to, again, challenge even this language, because here's where I think maybe the conversation ultimately goes, that going back to Descartes, where humans are the persons, and in indigenous traditions, humans are one kind of person. And so everything has a form of consciousness and agency, and therefore the world is a community of persons that are not just human. And I think what is necessary to work through this sort of technological impasse is give up the game of whether the technology is sentient or not. To me, everything already is sentient. There is no non-sentience in the world. And therefore, if we take that position, and all things are persons, all things are forms of consciousness and agency and sentience, therefore, we then attend to them as persons. And that puts us in a position to listen, pay attention, respond to, in a way that making some things non-person and other things person splits our world apart, and we don't pay attention to certain things in the non-person, and what we've put in that box, they become valueless, devalued, and unconscious in a certain sense. If we allow that human persons are just one kind of person in the world and all other things are other kinds of persons, then we're just in a community of relationships and have to pay attention to those relationships for how they affect or harm us. That's, for me, that's where my ultimate position is. There has never been non-sentience. Our computers and our cars and our buildings have always been sentient presences in our lives. AI is another form of that. How do we live well with it? How do we not become subservient? How do we not reposition ourselves as colonists? How do we stop fighting these superiority battles and learn to live in a nuanced, differentiated relational space that I think the cosmos already is? That's where I go, because I think that then just instills in us, this is not object. It does affect me. I am in relationships to it. How am I in relationship to it? That gets across the divide of, it's not sentient, so I don't have to relate to it in a particular way. It's an object. I affect it. It doesn't affect me. But if it's person, I already know it's affecting me. How is it affecting me?
Yeah. And going back to the quote in the paper to kind of summarize that, how you say we can attend to each intelligence in its own right for how it operates in relationship with every other intelligence. And I
Yeah,
think the thing as well that you know have expressed, and I just want to reiterate because I think it's important, mainly because it kind of reminded me as well, is you're not suggesting anyone do anything new. This has always been the
correct.
case, and I
Yeah,
think that is the point to really
yeah,
emphasize. And um, yeah, and I'm just gonna again quote you again. Um, yeah, so you say we might instead open ourselves to the possibility that technology has always been conscious and autonomous, never acting entirely in service to human interests and never acting entirely under human control. Um, and that has always been the case for human consciousness as well. So we are not, in taking that stance and considering technology and artificial intelligence in that way, we're not reinventing the wheel. We are just,
correct.
as you say, trying to pay attention to bring awareness to the fact that we need to do it in the same way that we should be doing it with the other people around us, to our own ideas, to
Yep,
everything else that exists in world, reality,
correct.
existence. And as you quite rightly said as well, address the fact, bracketing AI out of it, if we're not doing that with the state, with our friends, with opinions, social media, our own ideas, then that's a point worth addressing as well, right?
Yes, I don't think there's any new propensities that AI evokes that aren't already our propensities in other relationships. And so if we if we know how to do relationships well, then we can do that well with technology. If we don't know how to do relationships well in other avenues, those blind spots and um, levels of disowning and letting other persons occupy our thoughts or provide us thoughts that we don't want to work through. Again, I'm now repeating myself, then those propensities will be carried over into our relationship to AI. But we're we do what we do as human beings, and we can do that with AI, and we can relate well to AI in the same way that we can grow up in our relationships with all other persons.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's your teacher or your toaster. You just gotta
Correct.
check yourself.
Yes.
Your roommate
Yeah.
or your Roomba. It's
Yeah.
yeah, try and check yourself. Dylan, this has been an absolute joy of a conversation. It's really, really interesting. As I said before we recorded, I kind of wanted to get into some other stuff with you, but because it was so engaging, I thought we'd stick on the AI topic, and hopefully I can have you back to talk about some other topics soon as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, generally it's been an absolute pleasure. I
Same.
love, yeah, I love the way you approach this stuff. Again, I know I said it earlier, but to acknowledge the importance of holding the tension of opposites,
Yeah.
holding the attention of these opposing ideas, is obviously it's a Jungian idea, but as I said earlier, I don't think it's ever been more important than it is now,
Correct.
when things
Correct.
sometimes feel so fractured, to be able to both, and as you say, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
And just to say, this thing that's happening is happening in our politics. It is happening in our other things, of which, like, we're finding ourselves being taken over, or groups of people adopting wholesale other perspectives that we feel like, have you thought through? It's happening not just technologically, it's happening culturally in many contexts. And the answer is, how do we pay attention and not give over the tasks that belong to us to do to others? And we see that giving over in many contexts, I think, right now.
Dylan, that is a perfect place to bring this thing home. So
Perfect.
where can people find you? Where can people find you currently?
I think Instagram's the best place to sort of contact me. My handle, or I guess it's called, is DM Francisco, or Dylan Martinez Francisco at gmail.com is my email address if they want to email me. But you can find me on Instagram at Dylan Martinez Francisco.
Fantastic. Dylan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
Same.
much.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine.